So, um, again, last couple of sessions, we've been talking about basically building out the capabilities around automating the user lifecycle management, right? This is your join removal levers process. A couple of sessions ago, we set up an Active Directory connector. We, in the last session, kind of talked about the access control model within OpenIAM. We then touched a little bit on synchronization and how that can be used to take data from a source and to be able to provision them into OpenIAM and downstream systems. What we didn't do was we didn't get into, sorry, the lower level details, and I purposely left them out till we got to this session. So this session and possibly the next one are probably going to be the hardest um, sessions to to basically explain. And also, for people who are new to this to be able to pick it up. And it has to do with the fact that we're talking about scripting, right? And developing the scripts which are where all the flexibility really comes from in terms of being able to automate this, right? So we're gonna get a lot deeper into this, right? So we're gonna basically revisit that whole synchronization configuration. I'll show you a few other things that you can configure in OpenIM as you're kind of playing around with this. And then talk about the whole synchronization, the framework around how those scripts fit together and what you can do within them. Last time there was a question whether we will provide a sample working script and a CSV file that goes with it. Now there are so the end and I said that we would, and literally about 15 minutes ago, we posted up to the community a sample CSV file and a synchronization script. That script is significantly better organized than the out-of-the-box scripts that we have as examples because part of the thing with Groovy and I think with most scripting language is that people think that it's scripting and you don't have to follow the same good coding practices that you would normally do, say, if you're writing code in a more structured language, right? So it allows you to be a little sloppy because you can be fast. The example that I provided is a little bit closer to the right way, that we should be doing things, right? And we'll use those, the things in that script in this session. We'll be building them out a little bit more. Also, don't worry about if everything on today's session is absolutely clear. So one of the things that we did in parallel was we put together basically a getting started guide that would be published probably tomorrow as part of our documentation to kind of literally walk someone through to building your first transformation script, and it will have all the core capabilities that we're going to talk about here today. Okay, so just a quick recap. We talked about synchronization, and we touched on this a few times. So it's kind of like a multi-purpose feature. On one hand, it can be used to load data into OpenIAM. So you can load data in from a CSV file. You can load data in from anything that you have a connector for. Synchronization uses a polling-based approach. So you can define a cron expression that says run at this regular frequency. So it will wake up, it will run, if it's a connector, it will query that source, get the data that it's supposed to, and then process it, right? Um, you can have multiple sources that you pull from. You can have your HR source, which give you primary. You know, you may have one for employees, another one for contractors, and you may have another system which is authoritative only for certain attributes, right? So you're not at all limited. One of the things that you have to be careful of is how long that synchronization task runs. So for example, if your main synchronization task is going to take an hour to run, for example, then you want to make sure that anything that depends on that runs after that task has been completed. This has been, a little bit of a it gets annoying, at some customers, especially when things run a little bit longer. Um, they're upcoming, and then later on this year, there will be a more of a visual modeler where you'll be able to lay out all your synchronization tasks and then have dependencies and do things in a nice, clean way and not have to fight this battle. Um, Another thing that comes up is I'm kind of deviating a little bit, is if whether OpenApp supports an event-based model, meaning can events be sent to it from your source system. So most of the big commercial source systems don't allow you to have hooks in them where you can, make these calls unless you write a custom module in them, which will do that for you, right? So if you have a way of having, to creating that capability on the source side where you can send messages, then there are a few things that you can do on the OpenApp side to have it be event-based. So one is there is this connector, which is called a source adapter. It can receive by default an XML file to support like SPML, or and really you can write adapters for different formats, but that can receive data coming in, and that will trigger off the processing that you can go there. You can also just call the REST API. There's an operation called save user. You just call that endpoint, and it will trigger off record by record, event-based processing. In 4.2.2, the release that it's going to be out next month, OpenIAM also adds a SCIM interface that you can use. So if that thing that you're working with on the other side can make calls to a SCIM interface, then it's a simple configuration at that point, right? And so if you look at, and the last thing is the managed system policy map. These are your target. This is what's going to be writing data down to your target systems, right? So the first two bullet points are really about your source data coming in. The third one is about data being pushed out. Okay. So if we're writing if you're creating your first synchronization task, right? So a couple of things you need to do, and we did this in our earlier sessions, and I'm just recapping it so that if people who weren't there, that it still makes sense for them. One is the kind of integration that we have. So we can have manual integrations, or we can have automated, which are basically using connectors. The manual, I'm not really referring to a CSV file here. The manual is when there is no connector, and how are we going to get data? Um, you know, how are we going to get data in? And there's workflows, and we'll talk about that when we get to the whole request approval session. The so if you have a connector or a CSV file that you can work with, then you go to your admin console, you create a synchronization configuration. You're gonna pick a source, which is your managed system. You're gonna pick the frequency, which is a Quran expression. You're gonna say, do you want to do a complete or an incremental sync? If you're, processing a few thousand records, complete sync is really no big deal. If you're processing 50, 100,000 records all the time, you probably want to do an incremental sync, just to avoid, not having to process records which haven't changed, right? You need to either pick the transformation script that you want to use, or update the one that you're going to be working with. You need to define the query. This is if you have a connector. So basically, the data set that you want to work with, and then again, if you're using a connector, which attributes are going to be made available to that script. In a CSV file, you don't have to worry about this. There's some optional things in terms of the matching rules. So we didn't really focus on this much, but in the synchronization file, synchronization configuration, there are two attributes: a source attribute, and a target system, meaning like the attribute in OpenIAM. So that's kind of like the primary key on both sides. If it's like an HR system, you may use something like an employee ID from that source. And you can map it to the employee ID in OpenIAM. You could have something like email if it is actually going to be unique, right? But it should be a unique value. Now, sometimes we can't find a unique set of attributes to use, and it happens more often than we would like. So for that reason, we added this option to have a custom matching rule. So you can write your own logic where you can compare multiple attributes, and if, those conditions are true, then you have a match. If they're false, you don't have a match, right? You can have a validation script. The validation script is going to check record by record if the data that that's coming in is good or not. And then you have a pre and a post processor. These run before and after. So, the pre-processor, things that you may want to do before synchronization starts, and post-processors could be something that you want to do after. An example of a post-processor could be, after synchronization is done, you want to send out a notification that says, synchronization completed, so many successes, so many failures, and here's a report, right? Something like that. That could be an example of a post processor. And then you want to configure like these downstream systems. Right? Okay. So focusing in on the transformation script, because that's really where the bulk of this really happens. The others are really kind of small, and 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 there's enough rope here to go hang yourself, right? So which is why this one's a little bit more complex. So the transformation scripts, at a minimum, they are used to map data coming in from your source to objects within OpenIAM. Um, the like I said, the transformation script is going to be called once for each record coming in. That data, once it comes, we'll look at the structure of the script. Once you complete processing it, it's going to get persisted to the OpenIAM database first. Once it gets persisted, then the business rules are going to get triggered. Um, and then, after, you know, you know, um, so that's basically the whole sequence of these events. Okay. So, um, again, in the transformation script, so the way it works is that the transformation script, the one that you create, it must extend a class called an abstract user transformation script. You saw this also when we did the group sync, that it extended an abstract group transformation script. These base classes are doing a couple of things. One is it gives us a consistent interface of what synchronization, what a script should look like. So at least a minimal structure that these scripts must have. And the framework in OpenIAM needs this because it needs to know how it's going to execute it, what it can expect, right? And then in addition to that, these abstract classes also have a bunch of helper methods. So things like, adding a user attribute, adding an address, adding a phone number, adding a supervisor, right? All of those kind of common things that you need to do in your script, um, they are, they're part of that base class that you can call. Okay. But there, in this transformation script, there are two methods that you must implement. One is called execute, the other one's called init. Init's kind of optional. It's like if there's any initialization logic that you need to do that's beyond what the default is, right? So very often this method is blank, but it's there as a placeholder. The execute, you will have to implement it. And this is where you have two things being passed in. You'll see in these parameters, there's a row object and a p user. Row object represents data from your source broken out by each field or each column, right? So every column will have a value, and you'll get this as a collection coming in to this method. And p user is your user object that you want to take this data and you want to map it, to this. Okay. So if I look at if I look at the basic structure, right? And here we're just kind of looking at the execute method because it's really the one that counts. You have some minimal things in here, like you want to basically populate your object. You may want to do some checking to see if this object is new or not. And then you can define whether you can execute those pre and post processors. And and then you're going to return a value. And this is in the documentation that we're going to publish as a collection of values that you can return, and it's going to impact the behavior. So for example, um, no delete means that this, it's kind of a really a weird name, but um, it basically means success, continue, this record was good. You'll see in the exception that it says skip. Um, and skip will basically say that is an error and you're going to skip this, right? There's another one which is, let me just check my script here. Somewhere I have an example of this. Um, yeah, there's a value called skip OK, right? And skip OK means, um, everything's fine, but don't process this record, right? So when I was, trying out the script, I didn't want to keep writing everything to the OpenIAM database, so I put skip OK, and instead of returning no delete, and it's a way to kind of see how things go. Okay. The next one is going to be about mapping attributes, and there's really two types of attributes, two types of things that you're going to do. One's the easy kind, and that's like you're taking, attributes that came in, and you're going to do like a one-to-one mapping to predefined attributes on that P user object, on that provision user object, right? And you see examples of this here, right? We get this map of objects, and we're going to say first name, well, it goes to P user dot first name. Last name goes to P user dot last name, right? And then, these next two, you see that there's a little bit more work going on. You'll see that, if it's a new user, we want to generate a login. And if it's a status coming in, then we want to interpret the status that was in that CSV file with statuses that OpenIAM understands, right? So there's like two different kinds of work going on here. And again, we all of this is in that example file that you put in, right? So you don't, um, hopefully it will save people a lot of time because the methods were created so that they can be reused, right? Okay, so now when things get a little bit more complex, so like when we want to use the various services which are in OpenIAM, right? There's the whole collection of microservices that you can call. All of them talk to each other through RabbitMQ. So you can't talk to them directly. You have to go through RabbitMQ. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to get a context to that, right? And the underlying framework in this is we're using, Spring Boot and the Spring framework. So you're going to basically use the application context and you figure out where RabbitMQ is and you get this login queue. And once you have it, then you're basically going to tell it, what is it that I'm looking for? I'm looking for, this object, right? I'm going to, search for this login. And then once I have it, I'm going to, put a message on that queue. You go and get this information and it will come back with a response and then you'll process it. This particular code is basically, in the part of a larger set of work, which is to determine what our login ID should be, what the username should be, right? I mean, if um, let's say you have a user whose name is John Smith and you already have a John Smith, then maybe, John.Smith is taken already, then maybe you need to do John.Smith too, right? And find a unique value. You may also have scenarios where, say, for example, you're pushing this, and this wouldn't go in your transformation script, this would be in your policy map. Like say exam account name, it can only be 20 characters long, so you don't want this thing to get larger, right? So you may want to have additional logic in how you shape this. Okay. That base class that I talked about, it has a bunch of helper methods in it. The question is, can you use the REST API instead of RabbitMQ to do lookups or is RabbitMQ commands? So two different scenarios. If you're writing Groovy scripts and you're inside OpenIAM itself, right? So this is not an external call. So it's like, a script running inside one of OpenIAM's services, which is the synchronization service. is calling another service which is already also within OpenIAM. That in that case, you want to use RabbitMQ, right? If you're building something that's outside of OpenIAM, meaning that it's not running inside this framework, then 100% you should use the REST API. And we will actually show you how to do that in one of the later sessions. We will set up a authentication provider, so get your client ID secret, do the lookup. Um, and there's actually some examples in our documentation now on how to do that using either Java or Python. They're actually fairly decent examples. Okay, so next thing, and this is just kind of a guideline because it's more of a pet peeve of mine more than anything else, is that whenever we use scripting, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, a lot of developers feel that it's scripting and who cares, and I can knock this out fast. And most good coding habits go right out the window, right? And it's still code. It's going to be running in production, and you should care, right? And it should be maintainable. So you should follow your normal defensive programming rules, right? Make sure that you don't have nulls or empty values, or and have good error handling. You should log things that you need to as well, and break up your code into good modular design, right? So that it's easy to maintain. It should be not just one giant method with 3,000 lines of code in it, right? It's like you shouldn't do that. And then obviously, you should validate that things are, a set, and reuse common code, right? So that you're not doing work they don't need to do. Okay. So let's go into the example a little bit, and then we'll go into the policy map from. All right, let's log on and come back in from the beginning just so that we have reference. So a couple of things. So I created a new synchronization task here. Um, and I just called it source CSV, give it an example. And this is pretty straightforward, right? These are the things that we said. It's a CSV file. The managed system in this case I'm using is OpenIAM because I'm writing to the OpenIAM schema. And when this provisioning target system checkbox is on, it will trigger the business rules to figure out what downstream things to write to. And these are my CSV files and my data source. So I'm going to upload a new file that I created earlier, and I can preview this. So it has a test user, so on and so forth. Now, in the background, uh, sure I did. What I did was I used the OpenApp CLI command to basically monitor the logs. And I wanted to see what I was, what was happening as I was kind of running these scripts, right? So we have everything set up, and now I'm going to do a sync now, and you'll see that it started to dump out everything that it was, going through, right? So these are the debug things that were in the script, and it's kind of logging them, over here. And so when you're looking at the synchronization, there's two log files that you care about. One is a synchronization log because that's the stuff that's happening inside your Groovy script. Once it leaves that synchronization script, the next one that's going to get impacted is the OpenIAM ESB. The OpenIAM ESB is really where a lot of the core OpenIAM services are in that package. So things that the user provisioning service is doing, what audit might be doing, you can watch those logs to see if there's any errors there or any trace information that you've defined that may be applying over there, right? And then whatever I did here, I can go to the log viewer and I can see the file that I attached. This is the sync that I ran. There's one thread, there's one record, and it did an add operation, right? And if I were to say open this up, so you'll see from the logs it actually evaluated one of these business rules which I had set up and triggered, and the data that was there and anything that was going to come after that, right? So we would see that over here. A couple of things. This one we didn't talk about yet is in the administration tab, there is a system configuration file. So there's a lot of stuff here that you can configure. So a couple of things that you care about, especially when we're dealing with deployments where the user base is not limited to an English speaking country. You have different characters in people's names. So you can use the regular expressions to determine what is allowed and what is not. So you'll see that there's a regular expression definition here for your email address, for your login, first name, last name, right? These are some things. There's also a checkbox here that says you want to allow duplicate emails. So when I'm testing, and I just want to keep using my email address again and again, I will turn this on, right? Otherwise, you'll get error messages that will say, well, you know, um, email's already been used, right? Okay, let's um let's shift gears to the policy map. Okay? And in this case, I'm going to go to a different environment, which I actually have it a little bit better built up. 1 second. Let's make this a little bit easier to read. Okay, that should be a little bit easier, hopefully. Okay, so let's log in here again. So we're going to run through that same synchronization example, except this time in this environment, I have a few more things which are built out, so you can see kind of what the effect that it has on the user. Okay, so just bear with you for 1 second. I'm just going to go ahead and change some data in that source file. No, that's not actually the file. Yeah, let's pick that one. That one looks a little bit more like it. Okay, so I've kind of just updated that file, and we'll just preview it just to make sure It looks okay. Yep, it's a different email ID. And we're going to do a sync now. And in a couple of seconds, we'll see those users being processed. So this was a user that we just created, and you'll see that it has, some bunch of attributes. Now, if you look at the user entitlements, you'll see that this person got provisioned into Azure AD. They were given their license pack, so they have an E3 license, their Power BI license, they have an AD account, and so on and so forth. So all of this came from the business rules, right? So if we look at here in the business rules, so I have a target, um, like this, which says if I'm either a support engineer or a DevOps engineer, then you're going to execute this, POC Azure AD license, right? And if I come down here, look at the target. Um, so this is the license that I'm looking at. So this is where all the work is happening, right? So um, all the entitlements that this person got, the OU placement, the AD accounts, the license assignment, all of them came from here. And if I wanted to, add more, I can go do that from here, right? So again, this is the same as what we did last time. Now, when we make this assignment to put them into an AD group, or we are also going to, um, we're going to basically generate an identity in each one of those, right? So if we look at this user, an account was created in AD and in an Office 365, right? And the work that's been happening over there is happening in the managed system. So if I look at, say, AD, and so first of all, you'll see, all the connections which are up and down, and so far this is all, stuff we talked about in the first and session around this, just the connectivity information. The real work is done in this policy map. So if I look at the user policy, you'll see all of the attributes that I want to manage. So these are all my AD attributes, and these are all the rules which are going to now. In this case, everything is done in Groovy. You don't need to do that. So if we have a one-to-one assignment, right? So you can say, for example, the city, you don't need to do this here. You can say it's a value in our schema, um, and you can pick from the various, predefined attributes which are already here, right? And assign them to this value, right? So wherever possible, you should use the predefined values. There's no reason to write Groovy script. It's one more thing to maintain. Use the Groovy scripts in cases where you can't, right? So a good example of where you can't is maybe a SAM account name, where if we look at the script, it's going to have some details around, you know, making the value unique, making sure it's within the 20 characters, so on and so forth, right? Now, when you look at these attributes, you'll see that some of them are, tagged as user attributes, right? Meaning that they're the normal attributes on the user object. Then there's those which are marked um, as principal, and there should be others which is marked as a password somewhere. But the principal ones, they are basically letting it, it it identifies that that particular attribute um, is the unique key, is the primary key on that record, and it is going to behave a little bit differently in the sense that in addition to calculating this value here, it's also going to put that identity into that list in the OpenIAM login table, like in that list of identities that we have. You'll see the same thing for password. If we come here, you'll see that it says, this is a password, right? So it's, again, going to be generated a little bit differently. Now, if you wanted to, in these query scripts, you can also, if you calculated the identity for the OpenApps database and you feel like that value will hold, you can generate it there, and then you can read that value and assign it here. So you don't have to recalculate these things every single time. And performance-wise, it could be beneficial because internally there's some caching going on where you can, help um, improve the overall performance, right? The This is the one thing that was not there in earlier releases. It's a simulation request. So we added the ability by starting maybe a couple of years ago to start putting the connectors into a simulation mode. And then later on, we moved that over to be part of the UI. And the idea is that at any given event or the entire connector itself, that that you can, turn on simulation mode and you can see the values over here before they actually go to the end system, right? So there's a question that says, when using native IDM values, are the types lengths of the attributes found only in the OpenIAM physical uh, data model? Unfortunately, yes, at this point. Yeah. Um, Although when it's sent to the connector, the it's sending a packet of data to the connector. So I'm not sure. I think the connector should be able to translate those values into the right format that it sends to the target system. I think I know where you're going with the question is, are you going to have type, conflicts if something is defined as an int and it's a different value, or one's a string in OpenIAM and something else downstream. I don't think you'll need to worry about that. Um, that the connector that you use should be taking care of that translation for you. Right? So the simulation modes, if we go to the edit manage system, you'll see that there is a drop down over here, and then you can say which events are going to be put into simulation mode, right? So for example, let's say you want to block all deletes, right? So this would basically say, well, I'm not going to let any delete operations go through. And by the way, I want to know what they are by catching them here, right? And, maybe we want to do an add as well. And let's just throw a few in here together. Um, and so if we take our script that we had earlier and we rerun it, so we're going to go back to the synchronization. So this looks okay, and we're going to push this out. Okay, so if I go back to my managed system for AD, hopefully it worked. If I go to simulation request, these are the two records that I picked up. I can review everything that's in here. Now, if I'm okay with this, I can go ahead and hit apply, and apply will basically, it will let this request flow through, right? So this will say, yep, I'm going to go ahead and provision that, and it's going to push it to my target system, right? And similarly here, if I don't like something, so um, the main reason for this, like sometimes we have environments where we don't have non-prod environments, and you're in production and you can't, obviously you can't test over there. So this at least helps us get some level of comfort that what we're doing is correct, right? And obviously everything that we did is in our audit logs, right? So if we go back and so we're seeing, all the save operations, let's, filter this out a little bit. So this was the synchronization that we ran. These are the two users that were created, and you'll see every single step that the system took, along the way, and including the email notifications that were sent out. Right? So this is it for our session today. Obviously, if there's questions, more than happy to answer them. Like I said, these scripts are already on the community portal. We will publish this video later on today as we have been, but sometime tomorrow we should have the detailed getting started guide with creating these scripts. It will also cover the pre and post processors, and the various things that we can do with them. Um, so there's a question that says, could you please exactly define words provisioning, synchronization, reconciliation from an OpenIAM perspective, including when exactly we should be using them? I'm slightly confused. Yeah, it's a good point. We use some words which are done a little bit differently. Okay, so when we say provisioning, we're talking about um, creating new users, modifying them, deleting them, or modifying them, changing passwords in OpenIAM and in downstream systems. So if, let's say, if we just created a new record that got provisioned into OpenIAM and into AD and into Office 365, right? That's how I would use that word. If I am going to remove them, I would say I'm going to deprovision them. Okay. The fun starts with the word synchronization and reconciliation. So most IAM products use the word reconciliation to be able to pull data from a system and pull it into OpenIAM or into their IAM systems. Um, they probably have a different word for the process to integrate with their HR system and the source there. So um, we kind of split them up a little bit. And this is probably way back when in the early days of OpenAI when we were building it. So synchronization for us means it's a one-way flow. It's pulling data from your source or your target, wherever that data is coming from, and bringing it into OpenIAM. We will do some stuff with it, and it can then trigger off downstream provisioning, right? Like we just did, where you can create accounts in AD and things like that. Synchronization is relatively fast. It takes data coming in. It doesn't have to do any bidirectional comparisons or anything of that sort. Um, and it lets data flow through, right? And if you're running in a cluster, it will split up those requests across each node of the cluster so you can have things go in parallel. Reconciliation in OpenIAM is a little bit different. It's a bidirectional process where it's comparing data between the two systems and making decisions on what it can do. It's heavy, it's slower than synchronization. So the right way to use it would be, let's say I'm going to run a nightly comparison between say AD and OpenIM, and I want to catch things which were maybe changed in AD outside of OpenIM and then take some action, right? So if I look at the reconciliation configuration, you know, um, we'll come here and, all of this part is kind of the same, right? It's kind of conceptually, there's a script, there's a filter query, things you want to manage, but then the real work is down here in these situations. So it basically says if a record has been deleted from OpenIM, but it exists in the target, what should I do? Maybe I should delete from the target, right? And similarly, if it exists in both, what can I do? Maybe I want to do nothing, right? And so you can define these these kind of situations and use them that way. But again, I would use the synchronization for things which need to flow one way. HR to OpenIAM to downstream, right? Um, Loading data from AD, for example, or your database into OpenIAM. That's again, it's still one way. Those are synchronization tasks. Reconciliation. I want to know what happened, find gaps between these two systems and take some action, right? Corrective action or run a report. Um, those are those are things for reconciliation, right? Okay. Question is completely out of subject due to completely out of subject for today's topic. What is the minimum requirement for the deployment of OpenIAM? And that the second question is around the same thing too. Um, if you're going to use the RPM files, you want a Linux VM with at least 48 gigs of RAM, eight CPUs. Yeah, that's the minimum that you'd want. And that sometimes becomes a problem in terms. And the reason for this is like the way that some of the default components are configured, like Redis and Elasticsearch, and you know, and kind of go from there. And the goal is in the next release to provide templates so that people who are just doing POCs or they're doing small deployments, they can run in less than 32 gigs, right? So, we know that's been coming up. The second question, and then that question is, can I write this in chat? Unfortunately, I cannot do this much talking and write things in chat as well. I mean, if you want to, help out, and there's a link on the documentation, that can be referenced. It doesn't need to be recreated over here. So then the follow-up question was on the same topic, adding a group in an account and target system that already exists. That is provisioning. Synchronization always overwrites values in a target system. It can, and it would, right? So it's one way. It's not going to do that comparison, so correct. Okay. So again, as always, appreciate everybody making the time for this. And we'll get this thing posted. And if you have, yes, we will, like I said, I'll get early on, all of the videos are being posted on that YouTube channel under the playlist. So it's literally at the end of every day, they're being posted up. Okay. And this will be there as well. Just go to YouTube, type in OpenIM, you will find a channel. There's only one, right? So again, thanks everybody for your time. I will see you next week. And if there are questions, obviously you can reach out to us directly, um, or it's on the community process. Um, there's a question that came up said, can we please discuss next session about the JML process birthrights? So next session, we are going to go deeper into the JML. We're going to talk about movers. We're going to talk about the levers as well, because we haven't talked about them. The joiners we have in some ways, and birthrights, we actually covered today and a little bit last time with the business rules. So if you still have questions, let us know where the gaps are and happy to answer them in the next session.